Hello and welcome to the Medical Ancillary Sales Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Berg, joined as always by my co-host, Vivian Hudson. Viv, we got a special guest today. You want to introduce?
Woohoo! So yes, we've got Justin Jones, who has been in the lab space for a very long time, and he's going to tell us a little bit more about the rapid respiratory testing. So I know we're kind of heading towards the end of the cold and flu season, but these bugs are always around, so this is always a good topic. So welcome to the show, Justin.
Thank you all so much. Appreciate it.
So Justin, we have been familiar and been pushing the respiratory panel specifically for PCR testing for the better part of, I guess, over a year now. And the popularity of this test really seems to be catching on with physicians. But I wanted to find out first and foremost what your experience has been with the respiratory panel. So I know that is the most popular PCR test that gets ordered. How is it going with your lab and specifically with the respiratory panel? What kind of growth have you guys seen?
You know, it's been it's hands down been one of the best diagnostics that we brought on board. The whole concept and point of the rapid respiratory test is to really, to be a tool for doctors to determine if they're dealing with a bacterial or viral infection, or perhaps a combination of both. And that's really where this test comes into play. As you're probably aware, there's an epidemic growing of the overutilization of antibiotics and leading to, now trying to treat some of these common some of these common bacterial conditions. They're having to use super antibiotics now because so much resistance has been built up. So this test really serves that purpose to really lead the doctor in the right direction to determine how they should best treat a patient.
I'm sorry, I was just going to sweeten that a little bit, to add a point on it. I was just reading yesterday that some new study that shows that kids that take a lot of antibiotics actually have a higher likelihood of developing cancer later in life, presumably because it compromises their immune system. It weakens their immune system.
That's 100% correct. That's very correct. In fact, that's where one of the big places where this comes into play. The test itself is, we do ours through the Luminex machine. And the reason we chose Luminex is because they have the only FDA-approved panel on the market right now. It's testing for 19 different viral pathogens and 2 bacterial pathogens, which collectively make up over 98% of all respiratory infections. So it's a very, very good comprehensive test. We have a very quick turnaround time with it. And it's got a very broad and I'd say kind of an ambiguous medical necessity of how to use, which is really a good thing because it lets the doctors practice medicine how they see fit.
Right. So how do you start a conversation with a doctor who is unfamiliar with this testing or is not using the testing? How do you get the ball rolling and get them thinking about possibly using this diagnostic tool?
Well, the first thing we like to, bring up and talk about is when they're dealing with what they've identified as a respiratory infection, how do they currently determine if it's bacterial or viral? And that's really the first big question that you pose. What we found is some will have, some of the rapid, test analyzers in-house that they will use. The problem is those have anywhere from a 50 to 60% accuracy. So they're really not doing that much good. Here we can sit there and tell them that, we can definitively tell them not only if they're dealing with a viral or a bacterial pathogen, but which one specifically so they know how to more appropriately treat.
So from that perspective, it means that the patient's going to get on the right treatment very quickly without the the guest situation, and back in my past life I was a pharmacist, and inevitably people would go to the doctor, get given some antibiotics, and 2 or 3 days later they come in with a new prescription because the first lot didn't work because it wasn't actually the right lot. So this is a very real problem, and certainly I can see the value in the testing, and it's got to be great for insurance, and it's got to be great for the patient, and it's got to be great for the community, because it means that a lot less spread of diseases as well.
Absolutely. And then to add on top of that, the doctor is able to provide the most cutting edge technology and incorporate into how they practice medicine. So if I'm a patient, I'm seeing a doctor, I want to know that they're using the most, latest and up to date technology, drugs, what have you, knowing that I'm going to get the best treatment possible. So you're 100% correct.
Go ahead, Viv.
I was just going to say, so what's been the uptake like for physicians with this particular solution? So when it's being presented to a doctor, how many doctors are going, yeah, that's really great, let's get started?
We've been pleasantly surprised. When we first went live with this, we wanted to kind of control our rollout. So we just started with a few marketing folks that we have a very long-standing relationship with, and we tried it out in a couple specific clinics, and the uptake was extremely fast. One of the concerns was how long the turnaround times would be, and we have a 24-hour turnaround time, and the doctors find that is more than adequate. They were concerned that it was going to kind of follow the same steps like pharmacogenetic testing, and they just didn't understand how a test that might take 4 or 5, 6 days to get a report back would provide them any value. But with this and a 24-hour turnaround time, they find that it absolutely can still fit into how they want to practice and treat, and it doesn't really disrupt their flow with how they're dealing with the patients. We found that outside of family practice internal meds, the pediatrics have really taken a big liking to it, and to me that's very interesting because the pediatric market space is not a particular market that gets inundated with a lot of these different diagnostics. So you really have a kind of an open market there to go after. We also found that the nursing homes and assisted living really like to utilize this test. In fact, we found that it's become a part of their standing protocols with how they just deal and manage with their patient populations on their campuses. So we found that there is a lot of opportunity with this test. But bottom line is, it's a very good and very much needed test. And when you have something where you're really putting the patient first and you're looking for a way to enhance or benefit the treatment that you're providing a patient, you're going to have success in healthcare.
Well, you hit the nail on the head there with the assisted living and nursing homes. I think you're really playing Russian roulette when it comes to the lethal potential consequences of the spread of pathogens and just everybody being in close quarters like that. That's particularly dangerous, especially when you have people with compromised immune systems like the elderly and indigent and those sorts of people. But you also touched on pediatrics, which is very interesting to me because I thought initially when I was learning about PCR testing, I thought, boy, that would be a perfect market right there. And as I was preparing for this interview with you, I was looking at some of the CDC statistics on the use of antibiotics. And they did some research a few years back on surveyed some doctors on why they are prescribing so many antibiotics to kids. And one of the things that would be surprising to anyone that hasn't worked in the drug industry, but I know we all have in different capacities, the number one thing that feedback that physicians were giving to the CDC was that parents expect that they're going to walk out with a prescription. And if you don't write them a prescription, they feel like they're getting gypped somehow. And I think that part of that is the brainwashing that goes on with direct-to-consumer advertising, and we live in this culture where it's you use a medication to treat everything, when for a lot of these, minor ear infections or sore throats or bad colds, they don't need antibiotics. So I think what you're giving is, what you're allowing the physicians to do is you're giving them some real objective tools that they could use and talk to the parents about, we could prescribe an antibiotic, but there are some dangers with the overuse of antibiotics, as we discussed in the beginning of this call. There are some dangers in that, but I'll tell you what we can do. We can actually run a diagnostic tool here. It's a 24-hour test, and we can determine the exact pathogen so that we don't guess wrong and accidentally use an antibiotic when an antibiotic may not be the correct course of action. So I think you're giving them the ammo to do what the doctors already think is the right thing to do.
You are 100% correct. In fact, it was back in the 90s when they were running some retrospective studies to try to determine some of the prescribing patterns with physicians. And you're exactly right. If a patient goes to visit a doctor, in order for them to feel that they got the value from their visit, they want to leave with something tangible. And that's where the prescription comes into play. And you're 100% correct with what you just said. The problem was, until this test became available, a doctor didn't have anything to really back up or validate what they were trying to explain to a patient. And most patients just didn't understand or get it. They don't understand that viral infections can't be treated with antibiotics. Now, to follow up with what you said, to have a report that you can definitively show what is wrong with that particular patient, it's extremely powerful now for doctors to use, not only so they can make the appropriate medical decision for the patient, but they can also, back it up and have something that they can use to explain their decision-making process.
I think the thing with parents is that they feel like they want to do something to help their kids, and if they don't have anything, it's like, well, I'm out here on my own. So they kind of do want that prescription, but certainly having that definitive diagnosis is such a gift.
And so what we found in the pediatric space, and really we find this kind of common with a lot of the clinics we're dealing with right now and physicians, they will still write a prescription for the patient, but they instruct the patient to not get the prescription filled until they are given the green light or, the stoplight about what to do with that prescription. And, basically they tell them, listen, we're going to get the results back from your report tomorrow. If it comes back negative, you don't need that prescription. It's just a waste of your money. It's not going to do anything. So where patients might not understand medicine, they definitely understand finances, and they definitely understand the dollar. So
right.
That's how we've seen a lot of the doctors deal with this, and kind of get to that overcome that challenge of maybe having to bring a patient back if they do need a prescription. They go ahead and tackle that up front.
Right. So I heard you say about the pediatrics as well. So from what I understand, a lot of pediatric practices do have a variety of Medicaid patients. So what do the insurances look like for this particular lab test?
So our lab is located in Texas, and we are under the MAC Novitas. So Medicare with Novitas for this particular test is the highest paying MAC in the U.S. It's got extremely generous coverage, and it averages about $650 a test. When you're talking about your Medicaids now, something that you really have to distinguish is if you're talking about a fee-for-service Medicaid, which is run and managed by the state, or a managed Medicaid plan, which is managed and run by a third party. What we have found historically and pretty much across most diagnostics, managed Medicaids will not pay for these types of tests. They just don't. It is what it is. But the states with their fee-for-service Medicaids, they will. And each state obviously has their own individual LCD determining what they will pay out, but we do find favorable coverage with the states also.
And commercial? How are you looking on commercial? What's your experience been?
Interestingly enough, in Texas, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Texas follows the Medicare Fee Schedule to a T. So it's right in line with that. And then Aetna, Cigna, Humana, United, we see, reimbursements ranging anywhere from $350 to as high as $1,000. And, you know, obviously all that's predicated on the payer, the type of plan, PPO, HMO. But one thing we do know across the board, it has very consistent coverage as far as the adjudication rate goes, because it has such a really good built-in medical necessity for the use of the test.
Well, Justin, this is awesome information. We are running a little over on time here, but want to thank you again for getting on. And if you guys have any questions or you have some doctors who are interested, get in touch with Viv and I. We can get you all the information about Justin's lab. We can get you all the sign-up forms and whatever you need. But great lab, great people to deal with, and a very useful test. So thanks again, Justin.
Thank y'all so much. Appreciate it.
You can climb a mountain. You can swim the sea.